What was your impressions of Robert H. Jackson?
Oh, well, I'm a Jackson enthusiast. John, I think, knows it. I said so in writing, and it wasn't anything I made up last year when I got up that issue in honor of Jackson. I always felt that way.
Anything particular? Any sort of style, mannerisms?
Well, I think having a fine style is a wonderful thing. Not many people have it. As I said earlier, Learned Hand had it, Holmes had it, Cardoza had it, although a little too lurid occasionally.
And you would say Stone did not have it?
No, Stone had a good, solid style, but it wasn't a flair, a literary flair. I'm talking about one that combines thoughts with a little literary flair.
Okay.
Stone had a good style.
Right.
Bennett, is there a judicial legacy of Justice Jackson? We often hear about his writing style, his ability to have command of the King's English, but from a jurisprudence viewpoint, do you think there's a legacy today?
Well, I suppose the Barnett case arguably is part of a legacy. It dealt with something that is going to come up as frequently as long as the Republic stands, namely the considerations on the side of freedom and the considerations on the side of what the state ought to be allowed to impose. And that general problem isn't going to go away. It's a question of where you draw the line. But I suppose the Steele case, seizure case, is part of his legacy. He wrote a separate opinion, and everybody regards it as the law.
Jackson comes on the court, and he has a clerk.
He did. He brought a fella from the Justice Department named John Costello. And John Costello had been in the class after me at Harvard. He was on the law review. I know him reasonably well, which is probably how those 2 years I got to know a little bit more about Jackson than I otherwise would have. And what Jackson was doing. I don't mean John told me anything he should have, but at least it was a friendly operation.
What did you learn?
Not much. I learned that he was a very quick writer, that he wrote very well. He had a wonderful style, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
The custom then, I don't know if it's still true today, the custom then was that a new justice, when he came on the court, in the first conference on argued cases, could pick his own opinion to write in a case that he was in the majority. And my recollection is that Jackson picked that silly New York bond case, railroad bond case that involved $125 or whatever it was as a test case. And it was a divided court. It was a very obscure point that was involved under the statute. And I think in the course of writing the opinion and Stone writing a dissent, I think Jackson managed to lose a vote. I think Burns originally voted with him and ended up voting with Stone. I think. Is that right?
I don't know about Burns switching.
Yeah.
You're right about the case. I've recently been going through bureaucratic files. There's a lot of correspondence from the Jackson chambers to the Stone chambers, but it's really to you about recusals. Jackson, having come from the Justice Department, is having to look at each list and say,
Yeah.
I'm out, I'm out, I'm
Yeah.
out. And his notes mentioning you get increasingly familiar.
I didn't know that.
And he's really writing his notes to Costello,
Yeah.
but he's beginning saying, for Mr. Boskey,
I
and then
see.
he says for Boskey,
I see.
and then he says for Boz.
That's news to me.
So do you remember getting
No.
acquainted with him?
Well, a little bit, but I don't remember the process.
Okay.
He was always very friendly,
Okay.
and I always had a very high opinion of him.
Tell us a little more about Costello. What was he like?
Well, for one thing, he was a good lawyer. He was a little handicapped because he was quite hard of hearing.
He wore a hearing aid?
I think that by his second year as a law clerk, I think he did.
Okay.
I'm not sure. But he served Jackson well those 2 years, I'm sure. He certainly was smart enough. And Jackson didn't need somebody to polish his style. He needed somebody to deflect him from error,
Okay.
if there was any.
Do you know if John had actually worked with Jackson at Justice?
I think he had. I don't know how much.
Okay. Okay. Was it unusual for a clerk to stay 2 terms, as John did with Jackson?
A little bit, but not absolutely unheard of.
Okay. Jackson
Like,
actually wanted him to stay a 3rd term,
Did he?
at which point John said,
See, I had the same problem with Stone.
right, that's why I mentioned it. It reminded me.